Hi, this is Bill Whitney from Calderwood Percussion. We just got this set of pearl tenors in Avon High School right up the street from our shop, and they brought them in for a cut down. Now this was both because their drumline instructor likes the sound of shallower drums, but also because weight is a significant issue for the student carrying this instrument. So there's a few things that we can do to mitigate that as well. So this is a fairly involved modification, but I thought I'd make a video series explaining exactly how to do it, because even though it is kind of a project, it's something that if you've got any band parents who are strong woodworkers, this is definitely something that can be done with the tools normally found in any wood shop. It doesn't have to be something to be done by a specialized drum shop. Now, obviously, if you have an instrument that you'd like to do this to, you can send it to us here at Calderwood Percussion. But if that's not practical and you've got some good woodworking parents, here's how you do it. As you can see, these drums have been worked on a number of times before, so we've got a few extra holes that we're going to have to work around. This is a pretty common thing when working on old drums. Also, interestingly, this Bach drum is just an old concert tom that someone bolted to this frame and left the tom mount on. So just removing that piece of hardware is going to give us a little bit of a benefit in terms of weight. Most tenors are held together with aluminum spacer blocks like this, but if you've got an older set of drums or a set of drums that's been modified and it's held together with bolts, now is a good time to measure the spacing between the nuts, because that'll give you a place to start when you go to reassemble the drums and you want to adjust the spacing between them. I like to put a piece of painter's tape on the drum and mark the measurement there. That way there can be no confusion about which measurement goes with which drum shell. Now we're going to use the bottom set of hardware holes as the new top set of hardware holes and just shift things down. Unfortunately, these drums have been modified a number of times, so some of the hardware spacing is a little bit ambiguous. In those cases, I'm going to use some painter's tape and mark a line where I think the new hardware hole should be placed. We're going to use the original bottom lug holes as the new top lug holes. Ideally, we'd want to cut the drum right here so that we're cutting off these holes and place the bearing edge right under the original top lug holes. But this only gives us about 3/4 of an inch of clearance between the top of the lug and the bearing edge. That's not enough. For these drums, we're going to need a minimum of 1.25 inches, which means we're going to have to plug these hardware holes. Because the stress from the lug causes these hardware holes to go out of round over time, we're going to drill them out to the next size up, which in this case is 3/8 of an inch. We're then going to cut plugs out of the excess part of the shell that we're going to cut off using this plug cutter. Now, if you don't have plug cutters on hand, you can use dowels and that'll work just fine, especially because this part of the shell is going to be covered by the flesh hoop of the head. Okay, now that the shells are prepped, it's time to actually make our cut. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. So we're going to use a table saw to do this. If you have a cool roller jig, that's great, but it's not actually necessary. You can just carefully roll the shell along the table against the fence. These drums are pretty old and the wrap is pretty wavy, which means it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride. So we're going to have a little bit of extra work to do to clean up the cut after we do this, but I think it's still going to work. Okay, so we know we need at least 1.25 inches from the top of the lug to the bearing edge for clearance for the head. So we're going to go with 1 3/8 inches, and since I think this cut isn't going to be very clean, there's probably going to be a lot of sanding to do, we better give ourselves a little bit of room for that. So we're going to mark the shell just proud of 1 3/8 inches, which means we can cut off 1 3/4 inches pretty much even. So we're going to set the fence for that and see what happens. Alright, the fence is set so that this edge of the blade is 1 3/4 inches away from the fence. The rollers are set. We're going to keep the shell pressed up against the fence, raise the blade into the shell as we turn it. Here we go. Okay, that actually went better than I thought it was going to. You can see there's definitely some tooling marks, but that edge is really pretty flat and really pretty straight. So we do have some sanding to do to level the edge before we can cut the new bearing edge, and obviously some cleanups to do on the inside. But all in all, I think this is going to work. Let's do the rest. Before new bearing edges can be cut, we have to true the edge of the drum shell. We do that on this tempered glass tabletop with a piece of adhesive back sandpaper on it. The next thing we're going to do is clean up the inside of the shell where we plug the holes with a palm sander. To locate our new hardware holes, we need to first measure the hole spacing on the lug. So it's 1.5 inches from center to center. So we're going to run painter's tape down from this hole, and then we'll mark a straight line, an additional line, 1.5 inches down from estimating the center of that hole. We'll punch it and take it over to the drill press. Using the line we drew from the original back bar location and that formerly bottom hole, we'll use the holes on the back bar to mark where the new hole is going to be. When drilling the additional hardware holes, it's easiest to use a drill press, but you can use a hand drill as well, as long as you've got some kind of backing block on the other side of the shell to prevent blowout. For the same reason, I prefer to use a stepped drill bit when drilling these holes. The original factory bearing edges on these tenors was a full roundover, so we're going to try and replicate that using a 1/4 inch roundover bit with a bearing. In order to get the bearing to the right height, you kind of just have to trial and error. Start lower than you think you need, sneak up on it. And when you're doing the outside, it's a good idea to climb cut so that you don't chip out this wrap material. Now again, because these drums are old, the wrap's kind of wavy, that's going to cause some problems with the bearing on the router bit, so that just means we're going to have a little bit of hand sanding to do at the end. I like to use 320 grit sandpaper and a foam sanding block to go over the edges after we've come off the router, both to smooth them out and to get rid of any bumps that there might have been as a result of the waves in the wrap. It's sometimes a good idea to run a strip of painter's tape around if you know you're going to be doing heavy sanding so that you don't mess up the finish. Now that the edges are ready to go, we're going to go back to all the areas that we've sanded on the inside of the shell. I'm going to use either a wipe-on poly or a oil finishing product or something like that, just to seal and protect the wood, as these instruments will primarily be used outdoors. Alright, now that we've got these back together, ready to mount the Spock drum, it's very important that all the playing surfaces be level, and we need to make sure that we mount the Spock drum so that it has a consistent playing surface with all the other drums. It is very unlikely at this point that the original mounting holes are going to provide us with that level playing surface. So what we're going to do is shift the drum over 90 degrees. In this case, we've got the old tom mount. We can go ahead and use that as our center line, but if you didn't have that, you just measure between two lug holes, find the center, use a combo square to draw a line straight down. We're going to lay the tenors down and set the Spock against the back bar and use the holes in the back bar to figure out exactly where we need to drill. Now that we know where our final mounting holes are going to be, we can use that to inform our decision as how deep we can make this tom. Since 6 inches is still well inside the holes that we need, and I think that's a great depth for a Spock drum, that's what we're going to go with. My shell cutting jig is a little bit too large to cut a 6-inch shell, so we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. We'll use the original bottom badge holes as the new top holes with the badge in place. We'll use the holes to carefully drill out new bottom holes. Alright, there you have it. These tenors are just short of 2 inches shallower than they used to be, and we managed to shave off a couple of pounds, so that should make it a little easier on the student. If you have any questions, feel free to email calderwood.percussion@gmail.com or ask in the comments below. Thanks. See you next time.